Hello, welcome to the History Inquirer. This is where we explore or inquire into the past to understand our present. In this case, in this episode, we will be looking into the history of New England and the Pilgrims coming over on the Mayflower to discover why New England is the way that it is today. We will take a look at the people, the religion, the motives, the culture, and the mindset of the people, and also the climate and geography. What were the colonists trying to accomplish? What were the goals? How did they establish their settlements? The way of life? How does the colonization of New England compare with the colonization of Virginia? Lastly, how does this affect us today? Well, pull up a seat, grab a drink, grab some snacks if you want, and I'll tell you. But first, I can tell from my analytics that some of you haven't subscribed yet. It's easy, it's free, so if you like the content, you want to see more, then please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. I really appreciate it a lot. Also, if you did like the video, please leave a like. And if you did not like it, feel free to leave a dislike. And if you don't know, the like and dislike buttons are the thumbs up, thumbs down buttons below the video. And now, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this video is about the history of New England. So, unfortunately, there are no pirates or privateers in this one. Oh. Now, there is the Mayflower and some merchants, maybe later on some smugglers in Rhode Island. We shall see. You landlubbers. But no pirates, no privateers, except for me. Do you like my new hat? It's pretty big, as you can see. Phase 1 of my pirate costume is complete. Eventually, I will have a full set, which I will wear when talking pirates. And I will be doing a full pirate history series at some point. I do not know when, but stay tuned, you landlubbers. And now, back to history. My history of New England will begin with the explorations by Captain John Smith, followed by the coming of the Pilgrims. Part 2 will cover the history of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Topeka War, and King Philip's War, as well as the settlement of the rest of New England in the 17th century. Also, at this time, we do not have a new flag to talk about, since the colonists would have used the same flag as at Jamestown. The Mayflower used the King's colors that you see behind me, as well as the English cross of St. George flag. So, no new flag today. However, next time, maybe, we shall see. After all, I gotta add a little suspense, a little mystery, just to keep things interesting, you know? And now I'm on page 2 of my script, and I haven't said very much about New England. This is why I usually had 2 parts of these videos. It is hard fitting everything into a 20-minute video, and this will probably go longer than that, so please bear with me. Also, I'm experiencing some sinus congestion, so once again, please bear with me. And now, with my rambling over, finally, let's begin. The year was 1614. That year, 2 ships would leave London, England, bound for the New World, the land of Northern Virginia, or as we know it today, New England. No, this was not the Pilgrims, not yet. They would not set out for the New World until 1620. Instead, the ships were led by one man, one explorer, by the name of Captain John Smith. He would make at least 3 voyages to New England and write down a description of the country. he says that New England, and I quote, New England is that part of America in the ocean sea opposite Nova Albion in the South Sea, discovered by the most memorable Sir Francis Drake in his voyage about the world. In regard to this is styled New England being in the same latitude. End quote. So this is the reason for the name of New England. It is in the same latitude as New Albion, which Captain Francis Drake claimed for England years earlier. Also, if you were to draw a line from New England over to the west coast, you would be either Oregon or Washington State, much further north than the popular California location. I don't know if you've heard of Drake's Bay, but that's was previously believed to be the location where Sir Francis Drake established New Albion. However, modern research has proven this to not be true, and that instead the likely location was in Oregon, which basically confirms what Captain John Smith says here. So, I also love this quote because it connects Drake with Captain John Smith and Jamestown and New England all together. John Smith goes on to say that, and I quote, that part we call New England is betwixt the degrees of 41 and 45, that's latitude, but that part this discourse speaketh of stretcheth, but from Penobscot to Cape Cod, some 75 leagues by a right line distant from each other, end quote. He goes on to talk about the villages of the natives, and the trees, the fish, the otters, the beavers, the harbors for ships, the quality of the air, etc. He also notes the rock quarries for stone and shale, that the climate is mild, and that the soil is fertile. Though that's fertile, quote unquote, because the soil is actually rocky, and as you can see, not exactly conducive to large-scale farming. Pilgrims would actually purchase the map that Smith made and a copy or copies of his description of New England, which would come in handy when they set sail in 1620. But who were they, and how were the early settlements in New England different from those in Virginia? What was the climate, the geography? As we shall see, the colonists in New England were different from that of Virginia. In Virginia, as we talked about last time, the Virginia Company and the colonists themselves were looking to make a profit, in addition to trying to survive and later thrive. It was settled by and dominated by gentlemen and aspiring gentlemen, merchants and landowners. Its climate and geography was conducive to large-scale plantation farming for the most part. Tobacco. However, in New England things are different. Its climate was mild in the summer and bitterly cold in the winters, which were longer than in Virginia. The shorter growing season, combined with rocky soil, led to smaller family farms and a focus on fishing, whaling, shipbuilding, and mining, which Captain John Smith made note of in his descriptions. That's a lot about the fish. Now, silver colonists became merchants and craftsmen, blacksmiths, tailors, carpenters, etc. This environment would lead to a diversified economy which was not reliant on slave labor. The people were hardworking, religious, and industrious. But who were they, you ask? After all, it's been a whole paragraph since you proposed the question, and you still haven't told us who these people were. Now, just hold on for a minute. Okay, sit back down in that chair right there, and I'll tell you. The first colonists of New England were the Pilgrims, who were Puritans, who decided to separate themselves from the Church of England and were labeled separatists. They shared many similarities with the larger mainstream Puritans, who would go on to form their own colony of Massachusetts Bay. They would later absorb the Pilgrims' colony of Plymouth. The Puritans were Protestants who followed the teachings of John Calvin and wanted to purify the Church of England of Roman Catholic elements from within, whereas the Pilgrims wanted to, and I quote from Bailyn's Barbarous Years, recreate what they believed had been the simple life of the earliest Christians, end quote. The Pilgrims, excuse me, and I'm quoting again, had the spirit of the Church of England ever returning to that authentic spiritual state and had declared themselves independent of its discipline, its sacerdotal powers, its secular sanctions, unquote. As William Bradford, the leader of the Pilgrims, wrote, they were, quoting again, an independent church of true believers bonded together for their common good in the pursuit of pristine Christianity, end quote. The Pilgrims first took refuge in Holland, which was known for its religious tolerance. However, temptations abounded, and the leaders of the separatists, or Pilgrims, feared the loss of their identity as they would be slowly absorbed into the Dutch mainstream. Thus, they needed a new place to settle where they could govern themselves and live in peace with those around them. They sent emissaries, and I'm quoting again, emissaries to London to negotiate with their Virginia company, and after months of delays, obtained the pen to settle in that colony. But then they faced the more difficult problem of raising the necessary funds. Success came in the form of a London merchant named Thomas Weston, who had an interested investment group at hand and the encouragement of the long-dormant Plymouth Company of Virginia, whose pending patent would give them legal jurisdiction over New England, end quote. The Pilgrims left their refuge in Holland from the port of Delfshaven on the Speedwell, a ship of 60 tons. They journeyed to Southampton first to pick up more passengers and another ship, the Mayflower. On August 5th, 1620, they began their voyage. However, they had to return to England twice because the Speedwell had developed leaks and was eventually abandoned in favor of a larger Mayflower. And to quote again from the Barbarous Years, the Mayflower, an ordinary pot-bellied merchantman of 180 tons burden, was a small vessel for the cargo it bore, perhaps 113 feet in length, 26 feet wide, with 11-foot depth of hold. When it left Plymouth on September 6th, it carried approximately 132 people, of whom about 30 were crew. The 102 passengers crowded into every available corner of the ship, not occupied by the crew or cargo, sleeping in double bunks in the poop house, the cabin, and wherever they could find space. The committed Pilgrim group was a minority, perhaps 44 souls in all, 18 men, 11 women, and 15 children, end quote. During the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean, they faced fierce storms that shook the ship, caused leaks, and cracked one of the main beams. Fear and panic set in among many of the passengers and crew, yet they managed to persevere, and on November 11th, 1620, they made it to Provincetown Harbor near the tip of Cape Cod. As far as where to go from here, the community aboard ship was conflicted. Some wanted to separate and go their own way. Some wanted to return to England and leave the Pilgrims on the shore. Thus, they were on their own in the wilderness of New England, and they had to figure out how to govern themselves. It is at this time that a plan was concocted to restore order and form a government by consensus, that a document was drawn up. This is the Mayflower Compact. It reads as follows: In the name of God, Amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc. Having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, in honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and of one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland, the 54th, and under many, 1620. And by the way, Annum Domini means in the year of our Lord. Now, while the Mayflower Compact was not a constitution per se, it was the first written framework of a government written in America and a forerunner of the Constitution. Future U.S. President and statesman John Quincy Adams, in a speech given at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1802, described the Mayflower Compact as that, and I quote, a positive, original social compact which speculative philosophers have imagined as the only legitimate source of government. End quote. After signing the Mayflower Compact, the colonists set out scouting parties to explore the land, contact the locals, forage for supplies, and identify a suitable site for a permanent settlement. In making contact with the natives, they were successful. However, in order to get to the food supplies, in order to get to the land, they had to dig into frozen ground, and then to transport it back to the ship, they had to wade in freezing cold water. Several of them became sick with coughs and colds, which then led to scurvy, and many died. Eventually, they discovered a site on a, and I quote, hillside at Patuxent, the cleared, cultivated, well-watered site of a deserted Indian village, which they would call Plymouth. End quote. While there might have been better sites elsewhere, the cold and the sickness were taking its toll on the colonists. They needed shelter to survive the winter, and so it was that the colony of Plymouth was established. During the winter of 1620, half of the colonists died. However, at the end of the winter, an Indian came who to their surprise, spoke English. He said that he would bring to them another Indian who spoke better English than he did to help them. The Indian that would come to help them was Tisquantum or Squanto. The first Indian they had met was Samoset. He had been kidnapped, the Squanto, he had been kidnapped in 1605 by Captain George Weymouth and taken to England. He was taught English by Fernando Gorges, with whom he was staying at the time, and returned to his homeland in 1614 as a guide and interpreter for Captain John Smith. He was captured again, and this time by English explorer Thomas Hunt, and sold as a slave in Spain, but he escaped and returned home in 1619. However, when he returned to his village, he found that everyone had died from smallpox. He then went to live with a nearby tribe called the Wampanoags, led by Chief Massasoit. Squanto became a mentor to the Pilgrims and taught them how to plant corn, where to fish, and how to survive. In the fall, when the success of the first harvest, the Pilgrims decided to hold a feast of Thanksgiving and invite the Wampanoag tribe to what would become known as the First Thanksgiving. I will cover this in more detail in November, around Thanksgiving time, 2025. All right. Initially, the Pilgrims wanted to share what they had with one another and hold everything in common, like a primitive form of communism. It didn't work. What worked better was that each household would have their own plot of land to work, get what they need for themselves, and sell the excess at market. Individual effort benefited the entire community. The colony's second governor would be William Bradford, who would be instrumental in the survival of the colony and who would write an account of the history of the colony. As time passed, more people arrived, and not all of them separatists. This would cause some problems, but the colonists were able to persevere, and over time, new settlements began appearing along the coast, fishing and trading villages. And in 1630, a massive influx of Puritans would establish a settlement called Boston. This would become the capital of the new Massachusetts Bay Colony, which would later absorb the colony of Plymouth in 1691. By 1632, the Pilgrims had begun to spread out and form satellite towns and churches, though William Bradford tried to keep the community together. This is how the town of Duxbury was founded. The colonists also sought to trade with Massachusetts Bay Colony as well as the Indians. In 1650, Bradford would look back on everything that had transpired since their journey began and would lament the loss of solidarity and, I quote from William Bradford, the commitment in behalf of the highest Christian ideals. Unquote. If the colony itself was prosperous and successful, with about 1,500 people in 1650, relatively low infant mortality, and a fairly high life expectancy, and it was growing. The Pilgrims and Puritans both placed a great value in literacy and education, and believed that everyone should be able to read and understand both the Bible and the colony's laws. Thus, in 1636 to 1638, Harvard College was established with the goal of training people for the ministry. And public schools were also established in 1647 in Massachusetts Bay Colony. By the early 1800s, the literacy rate among both men and women was near 100%. Though the literacy rate of women was behind that of the men, they quickly caught up. This is what would define the character of Massachusetts and New England as a whole, a community centered around the towns, churches, the schools, a community of hardworking, industrious, individualistic people united by faith and Republican principles. And we can see this even today, especially the focus on fishing and shipbuilding and lumber. Over time, relations with the Indians would sour and major conflicts would erupt in what would be called King Philip's War. However, that is a story for another time. This concludes part 1 of the history of New England. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time with part 2, next time on the History Inquirer. Thank you.